The restaurant manager grabbed the plus-size waitress by the arm. "Apologize before you ruin everything." Noel gently pulled herself free. Instead of arguing, she turned toward the elegant older woman seated at the head of the table. "Ma'am," she asked softly, "before anyone gets blamed, did the broken glass frighten you?" Silence swallowed the private dining room. Vivien Duca, the woman powerful men feared offending, simply stared at the waitress, unable to say a single word. The restaurant remained frozen. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath the warm lights, yet no one dared breathe too loudly. Every member of the staff knew the stories about Vivien Duca. She never raised her voice, never made unnecessary scenes, yet a single disappointed glance from her was said to ruin careers. Business leaders rehearsed their words before meeting her. Politicians measured every sentence they spoke in her presence. Tonight was supposed to be flawless. Instead, an expensive bottle of vintage wine lay shattered across the polished marble floor. The young waiter responsible stood pale as chalk. His hands shook so violently that he could barely remain standing. General Manager Randall Pierce stormed toward him. "What have you done?" he barked. "Do you have any idea whose dinner you're ruining?" The waiter tried to apologize, but no words came out. Randall seized the opportunity to humiliate him further. "I told all of you this dinner was the most important event this restaurant has hosted this year. One mistake, and you've embarrassed every one of us." Several employees lowered their heads. None of them looked toward Vivien. No one wanted to see her reaction. Only Noel did. She walked past the broken glass with careful steps, ignoring Randall's glare. Kneeling beside Vivien's chair, she noticed tiny droplets of wine near the older woman's hand. "May I?" she asked softly. Vivien gave the slightest nod. Noel took a clean linen napkin and gently dabbed the wine from the table before checking Vivien's fingers. "I don't see any cuts," she said, with a relieved smile. "That's wonderful. Broken glass can be replaced much more easily than injured hands." The words surprised everyone. She had not apologized for the restaurant. She had not blamed the waiter. She had not tried to impress Vivien. She had simply cared about whether another human being had been hurt. Vivien studied the waitress in silence. Her eyes, sharp enough to unsettle seasoned executives, lingered on Noel's face. There was no fear there, no calculation, no desperate attempt to earn favor. Only sincere concern. Randall quickly forced a nervous laugh. "Mrs. Duca, please accept my deepest apologies. We'll compensate for everything immediately." Vivien still did not look at him. Instead, she asked quietly, "What is your name?" The room grew even quieter. "Noel Barrett, ma'am." "How long have you worked here, Miss Barrett?" "Almost 6 years. And you're always this calm." Noel chuckled lightly. "I wouldn't say calm. My heart's beating pretty fast right now." A few employees blinked in disbelief. She had admitted she was nervous. Yet she hadn't allowed that nervousness to dictate how she treated someone else. Vivien noticed the honesty. "So you were afraid," Vivien observed. "Of making your evening worse," Noel answered. "Not of speaking to you." The answer settled over the table like a gentle breeze. Vivien had spent decades surrounded by carefully rehearsed compliments and polished manners. Wealth invited obedience. Influence attracted people eager to agree with everything she said. But this woman, this waitress, answered naturally, almost as if they had met over afternoon tea instead of during the most intimidating private dinner in the city. For reasons Vivien could not explain, she found herself intrigued. Meanwhile, Randall's confidence crumbled. He expected Vivien to demand someone's dismissal. Instead, she turned toward the trembling young waiter. "Were you injured?" The young man stared, stunned. "No, ma'am." "Then clean the floor carefully. Accidents happen." His eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Randall looked as though someone had pulled the ground from beneath him. Fear had always been his favorite management tool. Public embarrassment kept employees obedient. That was what he believed. Yet the most feared woman in the room had shown more composure than he had. As the staff quietly resumed preparing dinner, Noel stepped back into her usual position. There was no triumphant smile, no smug satisfaction. She simply returned to work, greeting the next server with the same warm encouragement she always offered. "You've got this," she whispered. Vivien noticed. Kindness, it seemed, wasn't something Noel reserved for important guests. It was how she treated everyone. For the first time in a very long while, Vivien Duca found herself looking forward to the rest of the evening, not because of the carefully prepared menu, but because of the remarkable waitress who had spoken to her as though power and status had never entered the room. The tension that had gripped the private dining room slowly dissolved, though not completely. Every server still moved with measured precision, afraid another mistake might undo the unexpected calm Vivien Duca had brought to the room. Randall Pierce lingered nearby, watching every plate that left the kitchen, as though he could will perfection into existence through sheer intimidation. Only Noel seemed unchanged. She carried each course with the same relaxed confidence she displayed every evening. Whether serving a celebrity, a retired teacher, or a couple celebrating their anniversary, her smile never varied. She believed consistency was the purest form of respect. Vivien noticed. Most people adjusted themselves around wealth. They became louder, quieter, friendlier, or more obedient, depending on who sat at the table. Noel simply remained Noel. When the first entree was served, Vivien thanked her with a slight nod. "Thank you, Miss Barrett." "My pleasure, ma'am. I hope the chef remembered your preference for lighter seasoning." Vivien lifted an eyebrow. "You remembered that? You mentioned it while confirming the menu earlier this week. I wrote it down. It wasn't flattery. It was professionalism." Vivien appreciated the distinction. As dinner continued, conversations among her family remained polite but restrained. Executives accompanying Luchiano's relatives discussed charitable projects and international investments. Expensive crystal reflected the candlelight, while soft piano music floated through the room. Yet every few minutes, Vivien found herself glancing toward the dining room, unconsciously searching for the familiar waitress. Noel appeared with impeccable timing, refilling water glasses before anyone asked. "Would anyone care for fresh bread?" she asked. Several guests accepted. Vivien declined with a gentle shake of her head. Noel simply smiled. No problem. No persuasion. No exaggerated disappointment. She moved on naturally. An hour later, the main course arrived. Vivien barely touched it. She cut one small piece, then quietly rested her fork. Most servers would have ignored it. Some might have assumed she disliked the food. Noel noticed something different. When she returned to clear nearby plates, she leaned down just enough to speak privately. "Ma'am, may I ask something?" Vivien looked at her with quiet curiosity. "Of course." "I hope you won't think I'm overstepping. I'll decide that afterward." A faint smile appeared at the corners of Noel's lips. "Fair enough." She glanced discreetly toward the untouched meal. "Is everything all right? You usually seem to have a healthy appetite." Vivien looked genuinely surprised. "You remember that too. You enjoyed nearly every course the last time your foundation hosted an event here." Vivien nodded slowly. "I suppose I did." There was a brief pause. Then Noel spoke gently. "If you're skipping dinner because you're busy or tired, please don't forget to take your medication with something in your stomach." Silence. One fork slipped from someone's hand. Across the room, Randall nearly stopped breathing. A junior server closed his eyes, convinced this was the end of Noel's career. No one, absolutely no one, reminded Vivien Duca to take her medicine, not unless invited. Vivien stared at Noel for several long seconds. Instead of offense, something softer appeared in her expression. "You noticed?" Noel nodded. "When you reached for your water earlier, I saw the small pill organizer in your handbag." She immediately added, "I wasn't trying to pry. My father used one exactly like it after his heart surgery." Understanding settled between them. Noel hadn't been observing Vivien because of her influence. She had recognized something familiar, something personal. Vivien looked down at her untouched plate before quietly picking up her fork again. "I suppose you're right." She took another bite. The family members around the table exchanged astonished glances. No lecture, no irritation, no icy dismissal. Instead, Vivien actually continued eating. One of her cousins whispered, "I haven't seen Aunt Vivien finish dinner during a business event in months." Noel pretended not to hear. She simply continued serving the table. A little later, she returned carrying the dessert menus. "The chef prepared 3 specials tonight," she said warmly. "The dark chocolate soufflé, the lemon lavender tart, and my personal favorite, the roasted pear cheesecake." Vivien looked up. "Your personal favorite?" "Absolutely." "What makes it special?" Noel's eyes brightened. "It isn't overly sweet. The roasted pears give it warmth, and the cinnamon reminds me of autumn dinners with my grandparents. Every bite tastes like home." The description was so heartfelt that several guests smiled. One executive laughed softly. "Now that's the best dessert recommendation I've heard." Vivien closed the menu. "I'll have the cheesecake." "So will I," another guest added. Within moments, nearly half the table ordered the same dessert. Randall silently celebrated the unexpected increase in sales, but even he understood that wasn't why everyone had changed their minds. They trusted the sincerity behind the recommendation. When the desserts arrived, Vivien tasted the first bite slowly, then another. Finally, she looked toward Noel. "You were right." Noel grinned. "I usually am when cheesecake is involved." A few people chuckled. To everyone's amazement, Vivien laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet, genuine laugh that softened years from her elegant face. The entire dining room seemed to pause. Several employees exchanged bewildered looks. Some had worked at the restaurant for years without ever hearing Vivien Duca laugh. Randall stared in complete disbelief. The atmosphere he had spent years controlling through fear had been transformed in a single evening, not by authority, not by wealth, but by simple, uncomplicated kindness. And for the first time in a very long while, Vivien found herself wondering not how perfect the service had been, but when she might see Noel Barrett again. Nearly 20 minutes after dessert had been served, the discreet chime from the private elevator echoed through the exclusive dining room. Every employee instinctively straightened. They knew exactly who had arrived. Luchiano Duca never announced himself. He simply appeared, and the atmosphere changed with him. Tall, impeccably dressed, and carrying the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to command, Luchiano stepped into the room with an apologetic smile, directed only at his mother. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said. "The board meeting in Zurich ran longer than expected." Vivien looked up from her coffee. "I expected as much." There was no disappointment in her voice, only familiarity. Business had always demanded much of her son. Luchiano leaned down to kiss her cheek before greeting the rest of the family. As he took his seat, several executives visibly relaxed. Their chairman had arrived, and the evening could finally proceed as planned. Or so they believed. A server moved toward Luciano's chair with a fresh place setting. Randall hurried over himself. "Mr. Duca, welcome. We sincerely apologize for the earlier incident. I assure you everything has been corrected." Luchiano glanced at him politely. "What incident?" Randall hesitated. Before he could answer, Vivien calmly lifted her teacup. "A bottle of wine broke." Luciano's expression remained unchanged. Was anyone hurt? No. Then I don't imagine it requires an apology. Randall forced an awkward smile. Of course, sir. He quietly stepped away, realizing he had received far less attention than he expected. As Luchiano unfolded his napkin, he noticed something unusual. His mother looked lighter. Not dramatically, just enough that someone who had known her his entire life could see it. The lines around her eyes seemed softer. The usual guarded distance in her posture had eased. He had not seen that expression in months, perhaps years. A few moments later, Noel approached with his menu. "Good evening, Mr. De Luca." "Good evening. My name is Noel. I'll be taking care of your table tonight." She spoke exactly as she had to every other guest. No nervousness, no exaggerated enthusiasm, no recognition that he was one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the city. Luchiano found it oddly refreshing. "What would you recommend?" he asked. "The chef's truffle fillet is excellent if you're hungry." "And if I'm exhausted?" She smiled. Then the mushroom risotto, comfort food, disguised as fine dining. One corner of Luciano's mouth lifted. "I'll trust your judgment. You won't regret it." She walked away. Luchiano watched her for a brief second before turning back to his mother. "I've never seen her before. You have now." There was something in Vivien's tone that immediately caught his attention. It wasn't casual. It carried genuine interest. The meal continued. When Noel returned with Luciano's dinner, she quietly apologized for the delayed service. "We wanted your entree to be freshly prepared rather than reheated." "I appreciate that." She wished him an enjoyable meal before moving to another table. Luchiano noticed she spent exactly the same amount of time with every guest. No favorites. No unnecessary attention. Professional. Natural. Authentic. Across the table, Vivien followed his gaze. "What do you think of her?" Luchiano looked back, surprised by the question. "The waitress?" "Yes." He considered it. "She seems very good at her job." Vivien gave a faint smile. "No. What?" "I didn't ask how she serves food." Luchiano frowned slightly. "I don't understand." "I asked what you think of her." His mother rarely repeated herself. The question clearly mattered. Luchiano searched for an honest answer. "She seems comfortable with herself." Vivien nodded. "That's closer." A few relatives quietly exchanged curious looks. They could not remember the last time Vivien had initiated a conversation about someone outside the family. Especially a waitress. Luchiano lowered his voice. "Has something happened?" Vivien calmly recounted the broken wine bottle. She described Randall's shouting, the terrified young waiter. Then she repeated Noel's first words. "Before anyone gets blamed, did the broken glass frighten you?" Luchiano listened without interruption. When she finished, he remained silent for several moments. "She asked whether you were frightened." "Yes." "Not whether you were angry." "No." "Interesting." Vivien set down her cup. "Do you know what everyone else saw tonight?" Luchiano waited. They saw Vivien De Luca. And she. She saw an older woman sitting too close to broken glass. That answer lingered between them. Luchiano found himself looking across the dining room again. Noel was laughing softly with an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary. Moments later, she bent down to speak gently with a dishwasher, carrying a heavy tray, thanking him for his hard work, before taking several plates herself. No cameras, no audience, no one important watching. She behaved exactly the same. "You've been observing her," Luchiano said. "I have." "For how long?" "Since she checked whether my hands were injured." "And?" Vivien's answer came without hesitation. "She's genuine." The single word carried extraordinary weight. Vivien almost never formed opinions so quickly. She trusted actions more than appearances, consistency more than charm. For her to describe someone as genuine after one evening was remarkable. Luchiano continued eating, but his curiosity had awakened. Not because Noel was beautiful, though she certainly was. Not because she was confident. Not even because she had impressed his mother. It was because she had done something he had rarely witnessed. She had treated the most intimidating woman in the city, like someone's mother, nothing more. Nothing less. As dinner drew to a close, Noel returned with the bill folder. "Thank you for spending your evening with us." Vivien looked at her. "No, Miss Barrett." Noel blinked. "Thank you." For reasons she couldn't quite explain, those two simple words felt far more meaningful than the generous gratuity left on the table. Across the room, Luchiano watched the exchange. For the first time in years, he found himself genuinely looking forward to meeting the same waitress again. By the following Monday, the private dinner had become the restaurant's favorite story. No one spoke about the shattered bottle anymore. Instead, they talked about something far more unbelievable. Vivien Duca had laughed. Not politely, not out of obligation. She had genuinely laughed after speaking with Noel Barrett. Every version of the story became slightly more dramatic as it spread through the staff. The Duca family left the biggest tip we've ever received. Vivien personally thanked Noel. Luchiano kept looking at her all night. By lunchtime, the rumors had reached every department. Noel wished they would stop. She wasn't interested in becoming the center of attention. When a young hostess excitedly asked what it had been like serving the city's most powerful family, Noel only smiled. They were polite guests. "That's all? That's enough." The hostess looked disappointed. She had expected stories about luxury, intimidation, or impossible demands. Instead, Noel talked about them exactly as she would any other customers. That quiet consistency frustrated someone else entirely. Restaurant supervisor, Celia Monroe. Standing near the reservation desk, Celia watched several employees gather around Noel during their break. They laughed at one of Noel's stories before returning to work with lighter expressions. Celia folded her arms. For years, she had worked tirelessly to climb the management ladder. She memorized every wealthy customer's preferences. She volunteered for every VIP event. She believed recognition came from impressing influential people. Then Noel had done something infuriating. Without trying, without networking, without pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had become the most talked-about employee in the building. Celia couldn't accept it. Later that afternoon, she casually approached two servers organizing glassware. "You know," she began, lowering her voice, "some people are smarter than they look." One server frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean Noel." Both looked surprised. Celia shrugged. She knew exactly who Vivien Duca was. So? So don't you think it's convenient?" The younger server tilted his head. Convenient? That, she just happened to say exactly the right things. Neither replied. Celia continued. "People don't accidentally impress families like that." The seed had been planted. She didn't accuse Noel directly. She merely encouraged doubt. Over the next several days, similar conversations appeared throughout the restaurant. "I heard she planned it. Maybe she wanted wealthy connections. Maybe she's hoping for a promotion." Each rumor became slightly different, but they all pointed toward the same conclusion. Noel's kindness had been calculated. The atmosphere around her slowly changed. Co-workers who once chatted freely now ended conversations when she approached. Lunch invitations stopped. Break room laughter quieted whenever she entered. Noel noticed. Of course she noticed. She simply chose not to confront anyone. Years earlier, after losing both parents within 18 months of each other, she had learned an important lesson. People often carried invisible fears. Sometimes those fears became gossip. Sometimes they became anger. Very rarely did they have anything to do with the person being discussed. One afternoon, a new waitress accidentally mixed up 2 orders during the lunch rush. Before Randall could raise his voice, Noel quietly switched trays and helped correct the mistake. The young woman whispered gratefully, "Thank you." "No problem. You'll probably get blamed." Noel smiled. "We fixed it. That's what matters." Unfortunately, Celia witnessed the exchange from across the dining room. Instead of seeing kindness, she saw another opportunity. Later, she cornered the young waitress. "You shouldn't depend on Noel so much." "I wasn't. She likes playing the hero." The waitress looked uncertain. "I don't think that's true." Celia offered a sympathetic smile. "Of course you don't." That evening, Randall called a brief staff meeting. "Our reputation has attracted even more high-profile reservations this month." Several employees exchanged excited looks. Randall continued, "I expect absolute professionalism." His eyes drifted toward Noel. Some employees should remember that personal popularity is not the same as excellent service. Everyone understood who he meant. Noel remained silent. Arguing would only prove she had been listening. After the meeting ended, one of the kitchen porters caught up with her near the employee entrance. "I don't understand why they're treating you like this." Noel adjusted her coat. "People are uncomfortable when something unexpected happens." "You aren't angry?" She thought about it for a moment. "I'd rather spend my energy doing my job well." The porter laughed softly. "I wish I could think like that." It took practice. As she walked home beneath the glowing streetlights, Noel replayed the week in her mind. Yes, the whispers hurt. Yes, being avoided was lonely. But she couldn't control what others believed. She could only control the person she chose to be tomorrow. So, the following morning, she greeted every co-worker exactly the same way she always had. She thanked the dishwashers, complimented the pastry chef, helped a nervous trainee memorize the lunch specials. And when the restaurant doors opened, she welcomed the very first customer with the same warm smile she had offered Vivien Duca. Because kindness, she reminded herself, wasn't genuine if it depended on being appreciated. Sometimes, its greatest test came when no one applauded at all. The rumors inside the restaurant continued to spread, but they never reached the people who mattered most. Vivien Duca rarely paid attention to gossip. She trusted observation. And observation required distance. 3 days after the private family dinner, she made a quiet decision. She wanted to know whether Noel Barrett had simply delivered extraordinary service to an extraordinary customer, or whether kindness truly defined the woman. So, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Vivien left her driver 2 blocks away. She exchanged her tailored designer suit for a simple navy cardigan, comfortable slacks, and modest leather shoes. Her signature jewelry remained at home, replaced by a plain silver watch. Without makeup emphasizing her features and without the entourage that usually followed her everywhere, she looked like any elegant retired school principal enjoying a quiet afternoon. Almost no one recognized her. The restaurant bustled with its usual lunch crowd. Business executives checked emails between meetings. Tourists admired the elegant decor. An elderly couple shared a bottle of sparkling water while reading the same newspaper. Near the entrance, Celia greeted guests with polished professionalism. "Welcome. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm afraid I don't," Vivien replied pleasantly. Celia glanced toward the crowded dining room. "I'm sorry, we're quite busy today." Vivien smiled. "I don't mind waiting." Celia nodded politely before turning to greet another arriving customer. Within seconds, Vivien had become nearly invisible. She quietly took a seat in the waiting area. Nearly 15 minutes passed. Several employees hurried by without noticing her. One apologized absent-mindedly while carrying a tray. Another promised someone would be with her shortly. Nobody was intentionally rude. They were simply overwhelmed. Then Noel emerged from the dining room, carrying empty dessert plates. She immediately noticed the older woman sitting alone. Setting the plates aside, she approached with her familiar warm smile. "I'm so sorry you've been waiting." Vivien looked up. "I don't mind." "I do." Noel crouched slightly so they were speaking at eye level. "Would you like some tea while you're waiting? It's on the house." "That isn't necessary." "I know." She smiled. "I'd still like to bring you some." Without waiting for praise, Noel disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned, carrying a steaming pot of chamomile tea and a small plate with 2 freshly baked butter cookies. "Our pastry chef made these this morning." Vivien looked surprised. "I didn't order them." "No," Noel smiled. "But waiting is always easier with cookies." Vivien couldn't help smiling back. "You say that with remarkable confidence." "I've tested the theory many times." The older woman accepted the tea. It was prepared perfectly, not because the customer was important, simply because every customer deserved care. As Vivien sipped her tea, she quietly watched the dining room. Noel moved constantly. She congratulated a couple celebrating their anniversary. She knelt beside a little boy to ask whether he'd prefer apple juice or lemonade. She carried extra napkins to an elderly gentleman before he even realized he needed them. She thanked the kitchen staff every time they handed her a plate. Most people thanked customers. Noel thanked everyone. A few minutes later, a homeless veteran entered hesitantly. His clothes were clean, but worn. He looked embarrassed. I only have enough for coffee." Before the host could respond, Noel stepped forward. "Coffee is always welcome." She guided him to a quiet table by the window. When she returned with his cup, she also placed a warm bread roll beside it. "I didn't order that," the man said quietly. "Our baker made one too many." He looked uncertain. "Are you sure?" She winked. "If you don't help us, I'll have to eat it myself." The man laughed. Vivien watched the entire exchange. No photographers. No wealthy audience. No possibility of gaining influence. Just quiet compassion, offered without hesitation. For the first time in many years, Vivien felt something tighten in her chest. Not sadness. Regret. How many people had smiled at her because of her family name? Hundreds. Thousands, perhaps. How many would have smiled exactly the same way if she had walked in wearing ordinary clothes? She wasn't certain. Eventually, a table became available. Noel escorted Vivien herself. "I hope this seat is comfortable. It's lovely. The sunlight reaches this corner in the afternoon." Vivien looked toward the large windows. "It does. I always think meals taste better with natural light." Vivien chuckled softly. "Is that another theory you've tested?" For years, they both laughed. When it came time to order, Noel made no mention of the previous dinner. "No. Welcome back." "No. It's wonderful to see you again." She simply asked, "What sounds good today?" Vivien realized something extraordinary. Noel had recognized her. She was almost certain of it. Yet she had deliberately chosen not to acknowledge her status. She was allowing Vivien something she almost never experienced. An ordinary afternoon. After lunch, Vivien finally decided to ask, "You knew who I was?" It wasn't a question. Noel nodded honestly. "I thought so. You didn't mention it." "I wasn't sure whether you wanted me to. And if I had been mistaken, then I would have embarrassed myself." Vivien smiled. "You took the risk. I figured respecting your privacy mattered more." The answer settled deeply inside Vivien's heart. This wasn't performance. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't ambition. It was instinct. As Noel cleared the table, Vivien spoke almost to herself. "So it wasn't just that night. I'm sorry?" "The kindness." Noel looked genuinely puzzled. "I'm not sure kindness should depend on the day." Vivien lowered her eyes for a moment. In all her years, surrounded by wealth, Power, security, and influence. No sentence had ever sounded richer. When she left the restaurant, she declined the umbrella offered by her waiting driver. Instead, she stood beneath the light rain for several quiet moments. The test was over. The answer was undeniable. Noel Barrett had never treated Vivien Duca differently from anyone else, because she had never learned to measure people by their importance. She measured them by their humanity. And for the first time in many years, Vivien found herself hoping that fate had brought this remarkable young woman into her family's life for a reason. The afternoon after her quiet visit, Vivien invited Luchiano to tea at the family estate. It was one of the few traditions they never allowed their demanding schedules to interrupt. The estate overlooked the river on the northern edge of the city, far removed from crowded streets and flashing cameras. Tall oak trees shaded the stone terrace, where Vivien preferred to spend calm afternoons with a book and a pot of Earl Grey. Luchiano arrived directly from a board meeting. His tailored suit was immaculate, but the slight loosening of his tie betrayed a long day filled with negotiations. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, taking the chair across from her. Vivien poured tea into his cup before answering. "I did." He accepted it with a grateful nod. For a few moments, neither spoke. They had never been a family that filled silence simply to avoid it. Finally, Vivien looked toward the gardens. "I went back to the restaurant." Luchiano raised an eyebrow. "Already?" I was curious. "About the food?" A faint smile touched her lips. "No." He understood immediately. "Miss Barrett." Vivien nodded. Luchiano leaned back. "And?" Instead of answering immediately, Vivien stirred her tea thoughtfully. "I didn't tell anyone who I was." "You disguised yourself?" "As much as an old woman can." Luchiano smiled. "I imagine that amused you." "A little." He waited for the rest. "I wanted to know whether that evening had been unusual. Meaning, whether she treated me kindly, because I was Vivien Duca." Luchiano remained silent. His mother rarely doubted her own judgment. If she had returned, the answer clearly mattered. Vivien finally spoke. "I waited nearly 15 minutes. No complaints? None. When she saw me, she apologized for my wait, before apologizing for the restaurant." Luchiano listened carefully. "She brought me tea while I waited." "Complimentary?" "Yes." "Because she recognized you?" "No." Vivien looked directly at him. "Because she thought waiting was unpleasant." Luchiano rested his cup on its saucer. There was genuine admiration in his mother's voice. Not excitement. Not fascination. Respect. What else happened? Vivien told him everything. The homemade cookies. The elderly couple. The little boy who couldn't decide between apple juice and lemonade. The kitchen staff she thanked by name. Then she described the homeless veteran. Luchiano's expression slowly changed. He only ordered coffee. That was all he could afford. And? She brought him fresh bread. Did she charge him? No. Did anyone ask her to? No. Vivien folded her hands together. She made it sound as though the bakery had simply made too much. Luchiano smiled despite himself. That was kind. It was dignified. She corrected him gently. She protected his pride. That distinction lingered. Luchiano had spent decades reading people. In business. In politics. In the dangerous world hidden beneath respectable boardrooms. He knew how easily generosity could become performance. Real kindness rarely announced itself. Vivien continued. Do you know what impressed me most? He shook his head. When I finally admitted I knew she had recognized me. What did she say? She told me she thought respecting my privacy mattered more than acknowledging my name. Luchiano looked away toward the gardens. The sentence sounded so simple. Yet in his world, names opened doors. Names inspired fear. Names changed conversations before they even began. Someone who deliberately ignored that advantage was extraordinarily rare. Vivien reached for her teacup. Then, after another thoughtful pause, she quietly said the words that would remain with Luchiano for the rest of his life. "People respect my name." She looked at her son. She respected me. Silence settled between them. The breeze stirred the climbing roses along the stone wall. Somewhere in the distance, birds sang above the gardens. Luchiano said nothing. He couldn't. His mother had spent years surrounded by admiration that came with wealth and influence. She had often wondered privately whether anyone still saw the woman beneath the reputation. Now, apparently someone had. Without trying, without knowing she was being tested, without expecting anything in return. After several moments, Luchiano asked quietly, "Has anyone ever done that before?" Vivien smiled sadly. "Very few." She looked toward the horizon. I almost forgot what it felt like. Those words struck him more deeply than she realized. As a son, he had spent years protecting his mother from threats, from manipulative business partners, from ambitious politicians, from people hoping to exploit the Duca name. He had guarded her safety, but he had never considered another kind of loneliness, the loneliness of never knowing whether affection was genuine. Later that evening, Luchiano found himself driving through the city alone. Without informing his security team, he parked several streets away from the restaurant. He had no intention of interrupting dinner service. He simply wanted to see. Through the front windows, he watched quietly. Noel moved gracefully between tables. She laughed with an elderly customer celebrating his birthday. She patiently explained the menu to a tourist struggling with English. She carried an extra chair for a pregnant woman without making the gesture feel dramatic. Then something unexpected happened. Randall sharply criticized a junior employee for forgetting a wine spoon. Noel never challenged him publicly. Instead, she quietly stepped beside the young employee afterward. "You handled that well," she whispered. "I made a mistake. We all do. I thought he was going to fire me. He didn't." She smiled encouragingly. "So tomorrow, you'll do even better." The young man visibly relaxed. Luchiano watched the exchange through the glass. Nobody knew he was there. No cameras. No family members. No influential audience. Every kind act remained invisible, except to him. For the first time in years, Luchiano realized he wasn't interested in learning about Noel's resume, or her education, or her ambitions. He wanted to know what kind of experiences created someone who instinctively chose compassion over judgment. The following morning, Vivien found him unusually thoughtful during breakfast. She recognized the expression immediately. "What are you thinking?" Luchiano smiled faintly. "I think..." He paused. "I'd like to meet Miss Barrett properly." Vivien lifted her teacup. "I suspected you might, but not as the chairman of Duca International." "No." He looked toward the morning sunlight pouring across the dining room. "As myself." Vivien's smile widened, almost imperceptibly. For the first time since his father's passing, she saw genuine curiosity replacing obligation in her son's eyes. And somewhere deep inside her heart, she began hoping that the remarkable waitress who had unknowingly restored her faith in simple human kindness might also restore something her son had quietly lost long ago. A week later, Vivien invited Noel to the Duca Foundation. The invitation arrived through the restaurant manager, who nearly dropped the elegant cream-colored envelope when he read the embossed seal. Randall hurried to find Noel. "The Duca Foundation specifically requested you." Several employees looked up from polishing silverware. Even Celia paused. Noel accepted the envelope with visible confusion. "Are you sure it's for me?" Randall turned it over, so she could read her name, written in graceful script. "I've checked 3 times. Inside was a simple note. Miss Barrett, would you be willing to help us plan several community dining events? Your understanding of hospitality is something I believe our foundation could learn from. Vivien Duca. No mention of wealth. No mention of influence. Just respect. Noel smiled softly. I'd be honored. The Duca Foundation operated from a beautifully restored historic building overlooking the city's botanical gardens. Unlike the intimidating corporate headquarters of Duca International, the foundation felt welcoming. Children's artwork decorated one hallway. Fresh flowers filled the reception area. Volunteers greeted visitors by name. It reflected Vivien's belief that generosity should never feel intimidating. When Noel arrived for her first meeting, Vivien welcomed her personally. I'm grateful you came. I'm grateful you invited me. Vivien led her through the building. We provide scholarships, food assistance, medical grants, and community outreach. It's wonderful. It can always be better. That answer made Noel smile. You sound like someone who never stops improving. I learned that from watching good people. They spent the morning discussing a new project. Instead of simply serving meals at community shelters, Vivien wanted every guest to experience dignity. Real tablecloths, fresh flowers, proper menus, waitstaff who smiled instead of rushing. Noel listened carefully. They shouldn't feel like they're receiving charity. Vivien nodded immediately. Exactly. They should feel like honored guests. For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. They had arrived at the same conclusion from different lives. Luchiano entered the conference room shortly before lunch. He had volunteered to review the foundation's financial plans. When he walked inside, Noel stood to greet him. Good afternoon. He smiled. I believe we've met. Briefly. This time, I'd like to introduce myself properly. He extended his hand. I'm Luchiano. She shook it. Noel. There was no awkwardness. No dramatic spark. Just two adults meeting honestly. As the meeting continued, Luchiano found himself watching the way Noel spoke with volunteers. She listened more than she talked. She remembered names after hearing them once. She thanked people for small contributions others barely noticed. When one volunteer apologized for bringing homemade cookies instead of expensive pastries, Noel immediately replied, "Homemade means someone spent time, not just money." The elderly volunteer's face brightened. Luchiano noticed. She had a remarkable ability to make people feel important, not by exaggerating, by paying attention. Over the following months, their paths crossed frequently. Neither sought excuses to meet. The foundation simply gave them opportunities to work together. They organized fundraising dinners, community cooking classes, holiday meal programs. After every event, Luchiano drove volunteers home if transportation became difficult. Noel stayed late to stack chairs alongside everyone else. Neither expected the other to notice. Both always did. One rainy evening, after a successful charity banquet, they found themselves carrying empty boxes toward the storage room. Noel laughed as she struggled with one particularly heavy carton. I refuse to lose a wrestling match against cardboard. Luchiano chuckled. Allow me. Together they lifted it onto a shelf. You know, he said, most people would have asked someone else to do that. She shrugged. I've always believed, if I'm capable of helping, I should. He leaned lightly against the shelving unit. My mother says the same thing. She's a wise woman. She also says you've changed the foundation. Noel looked genuinely surprised. I've only made little suggestions. They've made a very big difference. She lowered her eyes modestly. I just remembered how my mother welcomed people into our home. Luchiano noticed something in her expression. You miss her. Every day. So do I. The quiet confession surprised them both. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about charity, or restaurants, or planning events. It was simply two people speaking about loss. No masks, no titles, no expectations, only understanding. Weeks became months. Their friendship deepened so naturally that neither could identify the exact moment admiration became affection. Vivien noticed long before they did. She watched Luchiano smile more often. He left the office earlier. He volunteered for foundation events without being asked. The heavy loneliness she had carried in her son since his father's death slowly began to fade. One evening, after another successful community dinner, Luchiano offered to walk Noel to her car. The streets were quiet beneath strings of golden lights. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Luchiano broke the silence. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Weren't you afraid of my mother?" Noel laughed. He looked surprised. "I was. You were. Terrified. Then why did you speak to her that way?" She smiled thoughtfully. "My parents taught me something when I was little." "What?" "Fear explains feelings." She looked up at the evening sky. "But it doesn't always deserve to make our decisions." Luchiano listened quietly. "I was afraid," she continued. "I just didn't think fear was a good reason to stop being kind." He stopped walking. The city noises faded into the distance. For years, people had obeyed him because they feared his influence. Others admired him because of his success. But standing beside Noel, he realized she would have spoken exactly the same words if he had been an ordinary accountant, or a teacher, or a mechanic. Her kindness had never been selective. It had simply been honest. Luchiano smiled. "I think that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Noel met his eyes. Without hurry, without uncertainty, she smiled back, and for the first time, neither of them was simply looking forward to the next foundation meeting. They were looking forward to seeing each other. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Duca Foundation glowed beneath crystal chandeliers as hundreds of guests gathered for the organization's annual charity banquet. Unlike previous years, the evening was not designed to celebrate wealth. It celebrated people. Teachers who had volunteered their weekends, doctors who had donated their time, students who had earned scholarships, families whose lives had quietly changed because strangers had chosen compassion over indifference. At the entrance, Noel welcomed every guest with the same warmth she had once shown from behind the doors of an exclusive restaurant. She still remembered names. She still noticed nervous smiles. She still made sure elderly guests had comfortable seats before the program began. Only her title had changed. She now served as the Foundation's Director of Community Hospitality, a position Vivien had personally created after insisting that hospitality was not merely about serving food. It was about making every person feel they belonged. Across the ballroom, Luchiano watched her greet volunteers, donors, and families with exactly the same kindness. Nothing about success had changed her. If anything, it had simply given her more opportunities to care for people. Vivien stood beside her son, following his gaze. "I told you," she said quietly. Luchiano smiled. "You certainly did." As the evening progressed, guests shared stories about the Foundation's work. A retired teacher described finally receiving medical treatment. A young musician performed on the violin, donated through a scholarship program. Several volunteers thanked Noel for teaching them that dignity mattered just as much as generosity. The applause grew warmer with each story. Near the end of the evening, the master of ceremonies invited Vivien to the stage. The room rose to its feet. Vivien accepted the standing ovation with her usual grace before signaling for everyone to sit. She thanked the volunteers. She praised the staff. Then she spoke about the purpose of the foundation. "True generosity," she said, "isn't measured by what we give." She paused. "It's measured by how we make people feel while receiving it." The audience nodded thoughtfully. During the question and answer session, A journalist stood. "Mrs. Duca," she began, smiling warmly, "many people admire the close relationship your family shares with Miss Barrett." Vivien glanced toward Noel, who looked slightly embarrassed by the attention. The journalist continued, "If I may ask, how did your son win her heart?" The ballroom became wonderfully quiet. Several guests smiled, eager for the answer. Luchiano looked toward his mother with amused curiosity. Vivien's elegant expression softened. Then she smiled. He didn't. A ripple of gentle laughter spread through the room. Vivien looked directly at Noel before continuing. "She won ours first, for one long, beautiful moment." No one spoke. The words settled into every heart present. They were simple, completely sincere, and impossible to forget. Noel's eyes shimmered with unexpected tears. She had lost both of her parents years earlier. Never, not even in her most hopeful dreams, had she imagined hearing someone like Vivien Duca speak of her with such affection. Vivien stepped away from the podium and crossed the stage. Without ceremony, she opened her arms. Noel embraced her. It wasn't a formal embrace between benefactor and employee. It was the embrace of a mother, welcoming the daughter life had unexpectedly placed in her path. The audience applauded. Some openly wiped away tears. Luchiano walked onto the stage a moment later. He didn't interrupt them. He simply waited until they smiled at one another. Then he gently reached for Noel's hand. She looked at him. The same quiet smile she had worn on the night they first met appeared once again. Only now it carried something deeper. Home. Luchiano intertwined his fingers with hers. Not because cameras were watching, not because the city's most influential families filled the ballroom, but because, after a year of patience, friendship, healing, and trust, holding her hand felt like the most natural thing in the world. The applause echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers. Vivien watched them together with peaceful satisfaction. People had feared her name for decades. Yet the greatest gift her family had ever received had not come through power, wealth, or influence. It had arrived carrying a serving tray, offering kindness to a frightened stranger before anyone else thought to ask if she was all right. And in the end, the most feared mother in the city did not find the perfect daughter-in-law because someone chased the Duca name. She found her because one remarkable waitress believed every person deserved the same simple thing: to be treated with kindness.